before we start, I wanted to tell you something that happened at the hearing place today. So there's one young man, Caleb, who's been, I saw him last one or two times to adjust the hearing aids. And so we were going through all this kind of stuff, trying to figure out why I was hearing hums and stuff like that. So we were doing this, and we were working, and he was just, everything was fine, very professional. And then he, at one point, said, "Now, this isn't very professional, but I just started meditating." And then he told me about an experience he had meditating. And then we just started talking about the mind as the source of happiness and pain, and how thoughts control us, and how we can change what we're thinking and change our experience. And I don't know how long we talked for, a while. Yeah. And so I was just thinking that's the kind of, and one thing that was, when we were talking about my hearing aids, we were just talking about hearing aids, when we started talking about meditation and spiritual things, his eyes lit up. And it was so nice to see the difference between somebody when their eyes are like this and when they're, it's like, oh, this is interesting. Yeah. So it was just a reminder of how you never know how you can be of service to somebody, and opportunities come where you don't expect it, and then to take the opportunity, when it's there. Yeah, you did that with Marga. When, yeah. Huh? With somebody, something was going on in your apartment building, and yeah, this is an interesting story.
But yeah, that was so funny. We had to evacuate the apartment building, and I was helping a guy upstairs who had emphysema, and his son was running around getting the stuff in the car. And I said, "What do you do to calm down?" And he said, "Well, I was a student of Trungpa, and I used to do the White Tara, and I'd just come back from the Abbey retreat, so it was fresh in my mind. So we started doing it together, the White Tara retreat, and I'd never met him before, and no, I hadn't, and we just did it.
You were chanting on the street, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, he left it upstairs, but he just calmed right down. But what are the chances of us meeting and doing that in a crisis? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah. There are really so many things happen in our lives where there's these little slivers of opportunity, and we can make very good connections. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of silent meditation, and then I'll go back and hopefully finish these questions. So one of the methods for generating bodhicitta is through seeing all sentient beings as having been our parents and their kindness at that time. And so I know that you just did the discussion centered on, the relationships with your parents. So that's a relationship unlike any others, because we've known them our whole lives and they've known us at our most vulnerable when we were infants. And as we grew up, we developed our own likes and dislikes, our own values and opinions. And very naturally, there were differences from those of our parents. And we may have lots of frustration, or sometimes grief, or sometimes anger, because our parents are not the way we would like them to be. We may look back on the past and, I would have been much happier if my parents had done this and if they had not done that. And so there may be a lot of emotional reactions to things happening in the past. And then we see our parents in the present through the lens of our thoughts and feelings about their past actions. So I'm sure we could all go through long lists of ways we wish our parents were different. And some of these things we may say, yes, that's my opinion of how they should be different. And other times we may say, no, this is just how they should be different for their own benefit, so that they stay healthy or they avoid certain problems. But of course, as much as we try to mold our parents into what we would like them to be, it doesn't work so well. They have habits that have been developed since even before we were born. So for getting a sense of the kindness of our parents when cultivating bodhicitta, let's try for a moment to put aside all of our thoughts and feelings about our parents, all the ways in which we wish they had been different in the past, in which we wish they would be different now, in which we hope they will change in the future. So put all of that aside. And try, just with a mind that accepts what they are, who they are, just care about them because they're a living being. Let's have a few minutes of silence and try to do that. If thoughts and feelings and opinions come up, yeah, push them aside, ignore them, because right now we're just focused on wishing them well, caring about them, simply because they exist. So they haven't always been your parents. They won't be your parents in future lives. In fact, in future lives, they won't even be who they are now. So can we open our heart to them simply because they're sentient beings who want happiness, not suffering, and who don't know how to bring that about? Can we love them just as they are, as these very confused sentient beings, and then have hope and dedicate merit so that in future lives, however we're born, whatever kind of relationship we may have, may we benefit them and help them learn the teachings and progress on the path. And try to cultivate that kind of attitude towards them. And then expand that feeling towards all living beings. When you just imagine your mom or your dad, can you see them just as sentient beings? Or if you just think of them, is there this whole flood of thoughts and feelings and opinions and frustrations and wanting to change them? And does all that come in as soon as you think of them? Yeah. Can we think of them as just sentient beings who want happiness and not suffering? Or does automatically all that other stuff come in? And we believe all of that other stuff. Whatever our experience was with those people, we think that's who they are. That is their personality. They will never change. Yeah, we try and benefit them. And they're just always fill in the blank. It's interesting, isn't it? Just try and see them just suffering sentient beings who are going to die and be reborn. And we don't know in what kind of situation we'll encounter them again. I mean, we were all each other's parents in previous lives. Yeah. Do you know who anybody was and what kind of previous life, what your relationship was when everybody else in this room had been your parents? Do you remember? Yeah. Who was that person who they were 25 eons ago? Do you know? It doesn't matter. So do all of our opinions and frustrations and wants and needs and what is, why are we so fixated on that? Another way to approach this is to think of those people as babies. Yeah. Just think of your mom and your dad as babies. Okay? Then are they the same people that you're thinking of when you think about your mom and dad? No, they're just two little babies, that's all. Like all the other little babies. Little babies are cute, aren't they? Okay. Anybody have comments about this? Questions? Try playing around with this. It helps a lot. Whereas if we go, you know, I know that if I meet my mom or my dad or my brother, sister, whoever it is, in the next life, and I try and teach them the Dharma, because I'm going to be exactly the same person I am now. And even though they're going to have a different body and speak a different language and have a different personality, they're still going to be the same person they are now. And I just know, I'm going to try and say something and they're going to argue back. Yeah, I don't care how many lifetimes we've had in between, they have this personality and that is what is going to happen. Yeah. And, and then ask yourself, is that true? Mm-hmm. Okay. Should we go on about Bhikshuni ordination or whatever her questions are? If you want to say anything. Okay. So, question 7. If given a choice to change traditions and go over to the Sravasti Vinaya tradition, would you do it? Okay, in other words, like I was saying yesterday, we have a practice tradition that is Tibetan. Our Vinaya tradition is Dharmaguptaka here, and then, let's say that the nuns in the Tibetan tradition were able to take Bhikshuni ordination in the Sravasti tradition, which historically has been the Vinaya tradition in Tibet. Okay, now some of my friends in the I just mentioned briefly yesterday are self-declared Bhikshuni ordination committee. We met here years ago. Do some of you remember that? Yeah. And so So some of them, like Venerable Thubten Chodron, I think she would like to become a Sravasti. Yeah, she feels quite close to the Tibetan tradition in that way, and she would like to do that. I don't know about Venerable Lakshay. But what are your guesses for what I? Yeah, I would say no. Okay, why would I say no? I'm happy if other people do it. I have no opinion about um, all the other nuns in the Tibetan tradition that took Dharmaguptaka, an ordination. And let's say there's the possibility of the Mula Sravastivada, and that's been restored. I have no opinion about whatever the other people do. So I don't think it's any kind of policy decision like that. And I just think people should make up their mind and stick with something, you know. But myself, no, I wouldn't do that. Reasons? Because I feel very comfortable in the Dharmaguptaka tradition. The Chinese monks and nuns have welcomed us with open arms and are really delighted to see Westerners take full ordination. So I feel quite comfortable in that way, and yeah, with Chinese monastics, with Chinese culture in general. Okay, not just the food. Um, yeah, but yeah, so I feel personally no wish to change over. Okay, I would still, of course, my practice tradition would still be from the Tibetan tradition. That I don't want to change at all. Okay, but part of it, I think, also comes because what I explained yesterday of not feeling that as Westerners and especially as Western nuns that we were really accepted into the tradition. Accepted by my teachers, definitely yes. You know, my teachers very, I mean, repaying their kindness is impossible. So that is not the thing. The thing is just the feeling of the tradition and how they relate to people who are not Tibetan men. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean the Inji monks are in the same position, I think. But yeah, so for that reason, I feel comfortable where I'm at. Yeah, and if any of you want to go over and become a Sravastivada, that's fine with me. It's just fine. Just do what you want. See if I care. How do you remember? Did you ever hear that? Oh yes. Oh God. Yeah. Okay. Do what you want. I don't care. See if I care. Yeah. Okay. But I don't think any of you have the history with either of the traditions that I do. So, and you have more exposure, I think, to the Chinese tradition. Yeah. In terms of rituals and things like that. In terms of the teachings, definitely with the Tibetan teachers. Okay. Did you study for a Geshe degree? Why or why not? No, I didn't, because when I started, there was no such thing as a Geshe degree for women. I wanted to go study at the monasteries in South India. I was very attracted to that the philosophical teachings and that way of teaching, but you can't go. So I did some of that study in English with my teachers in the West. Yeah, but there was never an opportunity to really do that. Also, thinking about it, if I had done that, if I had gone to the South, let's say I'd been able to go to the South and study all the debate and do all that, I would have turned out to be a very different person than I am today. And knowing my tendencies, I think I probably would have become quite arrogant. Yeah. So in that way, I think it's good that I wasn't able to do that. Instead, I followed my teacher's instructions, even though I didn't always understand what they were about. Go here, go there, do this, do that. Yeah. So in one, for a while, it was really a big thing to me that I didn't learn Tibetan, and some of my other friends had, although not so many people who were Lama and Rinpoche's students at that time learned Tibetan. They didn't encourage it at all. Lama used to say, "Oh, then you'll know how to gossip in Tibetan." He said, "You study Lam Rim instead." Yeah. So, yeah. So I think if people want to go that route and do that kind of study, I think that's great. I rejoice. But I'm also concerned because that study is very intellectually stimulating, and it's really fascinating. And it's possible to just devote all your time in that and not have so much time to look at what's actually going on in your mind. And if you don't have the time to look at what's going on in your mind, then some of the old ways of behaving and thinking never get challenged. Yeah. And I remember one time, in Geshe Rapton, he was one of Lama and Rinpoche's teachers, and in Buxa, in the the old British POD camp where they went. And Geshe Rapton went to the West and Switzerland and started a monastery. It had a few Tibetans and then a lot of Inji monks, not nuns. I went there one time. We stayed in a building across the street. Okay. But all the monks learned Tibetan and did the debate program, did all their chanting in Tibetan. I mean, it was really kind of, whoa, this is very similar to a Tibetan monastery, except it was much better off than a Tibetan monastery was. Okay, and so this is where Stephen Batchelor went, and Alan Wallace, and several other people. So so it was just incredible what they were doing and studying and debating and doing everything in Tibetan. And then after Geshe Rabten passed away, then all the Westerners basically left. Yeah, some of them disrobed, some of them, I don't know what they did. Yeah. But I remember talking with Lama Zopa about it once, and he made the comment that Westerners want the kind of Dharma that's going to touch their heart. Yeah, that they really want something that will, do you know what I mean? Something that touches your heart where you can say, yes, what I'm learning applies to me. And if I apply it, my state of being will be much happier and much more relaxed and so on. And yeah, so he was saying, oh, maybe they all left because they weren't getting that kind of heart connection from the teachings by doing the philosophical studies. That kind of stuck in my mind that he said that. And he didn't go through, Lama Zopa wasn't a Geshe at all. Yeah, Lama Yeshe, he had to flee and go into exile before he got his Geshe degree. Yeah. And Lama Zopa, I don't know how much he even did those studies. Maybe at Buxa, he must have done something at Buxa. Okay. Yeah. So some people are disappointed. You know, when I remember I was talking with Marcia about this. No, I didn't get a Geshe degree. I didn't study for her. Oh, why not? You know, because she had been studying very hard to be a rabbi, and which is quite a process, you know, to do. Okay, then 9. According to the Vinaya, the advanced Geshe degree has texts that cannot be studied unless a monk or nun has full ordination. So those texts are the Vinaya, you know, Sutra, Tantra, everything else, Abhidharma, open to everybody. But the Vinaya, you have to have you can't study beyond the level of ordination that you have. Yeah. Okay. But the nuns, has texts that cannot be studied unless the monk or nun has full ordination. But the nuns who have tested and passed their Geshe-ma exams are not ordained. They were ordained, but not as bhikshunis, and were not encouraged by their nunneries to seek ordination. That's correct. Okay. Do you have any feelings about this? Yeah, I was very sad when I saw in 2007 that the Tibetan nuns didn't have much interest in bhikshuni ordination for the reasons I explained yesterday, what their teachers had told them and so on. So I was kind of sad about that for several reasons. One, I think, was that my practice changed hugely by taking the full ordination. The difference, I think, between my practice when I was a novice and then when I was fully ordained, really quite a difference because I had to grow up. Yeah, when you're, or when I was a shamanary, then it's like, well, there's all these other people who are teaching me and they're responsible for everything. And I'm just looking out for what's good for me and my practice. Thank you very much. And I want to do this retreat. And I want to study this. And I want this. And I don't want that. And yeah. But then when I took the full ordination at the ordination training, they really emphasized that not just the Mahayana aspect of we're taking this for the benefit of all sentient beings to lead them all to awakening by becoming awakened ourselves. Not just that, you know, think of something better than that. But the existence of the Dharma in the future depends on what we do now. And now that you are fully ordained, what you do now or what you don't do now will help the Dharma exist or degenerate in the future. And that really struck me quite hard because my full ordination also made me see that I had the opportunity to take that, which I very much wanted to do, as I explained yesterday. I had the opportunity to do that because of 2,500 years of practitioners that came before me. I didn't just show up and say, I want to become a bhikshuni. Here, give it to me. My opportunity came about because millions of people practiced and upheld the teachings and the Vinaya lineages in the past. And so it really hit me. Oh, I have to do that now for future generations. So I felt very much like there was a big wave of the Dharma coming from the past, starting with the Buddha and everybody from the past, this huge wave of practitioners. And little old me from, some barbaric country, because according to Vinaya, this country is barbaric. And even not according to Vinaya, it's kind of barbaric. But I felt like, here's this big wave of virtue coming from the past. And little old me, this kind of bratty kid who grew up, outside of Los Angeles, kind of showed up and was able to sit on top of that wave, and all the virtue and energy of the past just carried me along. So I could, as I had teachings, as I understood the Dharma more and more. And that image was and that feeling was very strong. And so, when you see that kind of dependence and that kind of kindness of other people, and so, we have the names of a few of them, but most of them we don't have even their names. But it was because of their practice, and because some of them ventured to go to India through walking through deserts and over the Himalayas and on seas with, water monsters and things like that. Because they all did this, I have the possibility that I have in this life. So I have to get it together. I got to stop being a baby about this and just thinking about me, my practice, what's good for my practice, what I want to do. It came quite strong. Yeah, so getting back to the question here, so I was kind of sad that the Tibetan nuns didn't have that feeling of how the ordination could really affect their study and practice. And now, I mean, I really rejoice that many of them are Geshis. Many of the nuns are Geshis. It's phenomenal. It's fantastic. I was able to be there at the first, when they awarded Geshe degrees to the first batch of newly minted Tibetan Geshis, non-Geshis, and it was really beautiful to see that and really rejoice at what they had accomplished. Yeah. And I just hope one day they can see the beauty of taking that step in their ordination and how it helps your practice. But I don't try and push it with them. It does absolutely no good.
The Vietnamese Geshima that translates for Geshe-la, wouldn't she be a bhikshuni?
I don't know. The situation with the Asian foreign nuns who come to study at Dharamsala, some of them I think may have become bhikshunis in their own country, or they may have not become bhikshunis and may have the shramaneri ordination and then gone to Dharamsala to do the studies. I heard of some, and sometimes when they get there, I've heard of at least one who said, I want to, reordain in the Tibetan tradition. But she can't, because the Tibetans would say you would have to give up your bhikshuni ordination to be ordained as a shramaneri in the Tibetan tradition. And if you give up your bhikshuni ordination, you can't ordain again as a bhikshuni. And the 10 precepts are the same in both. So don't think like that. It's not going to get you anywhere.
At Kopan Nunnery, there was a Chinese nun who was a bhikshuni,
Mhm.
and she was studying there. And then she would come and go, and but and I know in Dharamshala there was one Korean nun who gave up her shikshamana to reordain with His Holiness as a shamaneri. But there are also Korean bhikshunis who are in IBD, and I think they don't wear the Tibetan robe. They wear their
They wear
Korean
the
robes
Korean robes? Okay.
and study with them.
Yeah. I mean, there's different people come, they make it different decisions. Some will wear their native robes, some adopt the Tibetan robes, some want to have Tibetan ordination, some, they're happy with the ordination they have.
I'm just wondering, because if these are bhikshunis and they are doing the geshimas, and wouldn't they be allowed to study the Vinaya then?
But if you're a Dharmakuptaka bhikshuni, you can't study the Mula Sravastivada Vinaya. Okay. Yeah, the Tibetan attitude, basically, when they say reform, the word reform, we want to reform things. In the West, we hear reform and we think, we're going to make it more adaptable to the present, and so that we can take it forward in a way that corresponds with the present mentality. We think that's what reform is. In Tibetan culture, reform means you go back to whoever started this, and you bring all of that back, and you live like that, starting in the past. Okay, so very different notions of the word reform. It's not a popular word in Tibetan Buddhist circles, reform, and because, put it this way, in America, most of us are from immigrant families. I don't know if anybody here has some indigenous blood, perhaps. You do? So there's that, but then the majority is from immigrants. And so the countries, US, Canada, like that, everything is new. And we look at it and we say, it's like how many? 200, almost 300 years old. They settled America in the 17th century, 16 something. Okay, so maybe 500 years ago. But it's new. And especially, I find there's a difference if you grew up on the East Coast of the US versus growing up on the West Coast. The East Coast is older. The buildings are older. The plumbing is older. There's a much more of a feeling of history there. The West Coast, it was the wide open terrain that everybody just poured into and gobbled up. And I can see that difference just in America according to where you grew up and your sense of history. Now imagine a culture that is going back, I don't know the original Tibetans, how long ago they showed up, but Tibetans, people have lived on the Tibetan plain for centuries and centuries, and Buddhism has been there since the 7th century. And, Buddhism has done fine since the 7th century. So why should we change it now? Yeah, it came. We took it in. We love it as Tibetans. It's our Buddhism, and it's worked for us for how many centuries? 14, 15, 16 centuries. Why should we change anything? Yeah. So you can see that, and you can see why people would think that way, because you grow up rooted in that sense of of Tibetan pride, you can say. Also because Tibet was never colonized, and so they have a very strong feeling of this is our culture, and we have held the pure Buddhist teachings since the 7th century, and it's worked. So, and we never had bhikshunis. Okay, maybe one stray lama or another, really, or ordain their mother or somebody else as a bhikshuni, and but not according to the texts, and so it wasn't even a legitimate ordination, because you need the bhikshunis and you need the bhikshus, and it's been that way, and for centuries. Why do we need to start having bhikshunis? Yeah, what's this women's lib business? Yeah, you should want to become liberated from samsara. Yeah, all sentient beings are equal. All of them have the Buddha potential. But, and, whatever you add to it. Okay. So I'm not trying to put anybody down. I tend to see things also through a more cultural perspective, a historical perspective, and just realize that, not everybody thinks like me, and not everybody, has the same values. I remember, if I can go off on a tangent, we've been raised in so-called democratic countries, or at least they used to be democratic countries. Now I'm not so sure what's happening. Anyway, we grew up with democracy is the best way, right? Everybody hear that? From the very beginning, democracy is the best way. All countries should be democratic. However, to have a democratic society, you need a population with a certain level of education, with certain values, a certain kind of economy. Yeah, and this has been one of the problems of the US, wanting to spread democracy to countries where the people are not suitable at this moment for it. They have other ways of making decisions and solving problems. And they don't really welcome us coming in with soldiers and guns to tell them a better way of governing. So, yeah, so when I lived abroad, one of the experiences that came very clear to me was my way of growing up and how I was taught as a child about government and democracy and all of this, that this was an American idea. And, we can't force it on other cultures, and we shouldn't even try to. Because you can see in cultures that aren't ready for it, the country becomes chaotic. Yeah, because you took away their old way of doing things and you're putting a way of doing things that doesn't fit. Yeah. So, I saw that at, when I lived in the Tibetan community, how they made decisions, how things were organized. And I really had to stop and think, is democracy the best thing for everybody in the world? His Holiness is trying to make the Tibetans more democratic. But it's interesting. It's the only society I know of where the leader wants to give up power so the people can vote, and the people want the one leader to stay in power. Yeah, have you ever heard of any other country in this world where the leader wants to give up power for democracy, but the people want the leader to stay there, and democracy, schmamocracy? You know, it's so interesting. Yeah. So, just a teaching of widening our minds and not trying to expect everybody to be like the country we grew up in. And as a result, I did say, I'm giving you all sorts of sociological opinions, and I'm not talking Vinaya now, but it's relative, okay? It relates to the issue. What was I going to say? That, Yeah, after I made sure that you knew that I was going off script, now I can't remember what I was going to say. It'll come. Okay. Yeah, I just had to learn to respect other people's ways of doing things. Yeah. Oh, I remember now what it was. There were so many Western tourists coming into Dharamsala and into the other Tibetan settlements. And for us, I mean, everybody, it was cultural shock. We were cultural shock being in India, and then cultural shock being with the Tibetans and trying to figure things out. And India already is enough of a challenge, my goodness, especially back in the 70s. Now India is so much more modern. Yeah, but back then, whoa. So what I found, sometimes when we would get together with other Westerners, there was such a nice feeling of being with people from our own culture, and we could laugh in English. Okay. Don't ask me what that means, but when you do it, you will know what laughing in English means versus laughing in Tibetan or Chinese. It sounds the same, but it's different. Same, different. So one of my teachers used to say that. So I sometimes found when we would talk about, what it's like to be with the Tibetans or with the Indians, there were definite colonialist attitudes. We were younger people. We didn't grow up during colonialism, okay? But some of those ideas were there in our minds. And some people noticed it and some people didn't. But there was a thing of, well, these other cultures, they don't have the modern stuff that we do. And their way of doing things, they're yeah, there's that. And they're hierarchical, this whole thing, hierarchy is bad. People who say hierarchy is bad, tell me about one group of people anywhere where there's absolutely no hierarchy. Yeah. I mean, we all learn from the people who came before us. In that way, I mean, our education came from people before us. That's a hierarchy, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so there was sometimes this thing, this backward culture, backward economy, backward government. And so it was very interesting to see Western politically liberal kids having this kind of attitude, but not recognizing it. Yeah, you've had that experience?
It makes sense.
Yeah. So I saw with, going back to the women's thing, the nuns thing, that some Western women would come into Dharamsala and just, why did the nuns have to sit in back? These were lay women. They weren't even talking about themselves. Why are the nuns? Why can't they get the same education as the one? And there was a certain kind of, on the behalf of some people, aggressiveness towards this. We're gonna like bully you, or we're gonna ask you so many questions that you can't, that you have to change. We're gonna make you change and modernize. Okay. For the people who did that, all it brought was the Tibetan monks saying, oh, these people are very angry. Yeah. Anger is an affliction. We're not going to listen to people who have afflicted minds and are trying to change our society. We have the Buddhist teachings. We know what we're doing. We don't need their afflicted minds. Yeah. So that's something I learned, and I'm glad I learned it, because I saw people pushing. It became quite uncomfortable in some cases. Yeah. And it didn't bring about any positive change. I mean, His Holiness, I think when His Holiness began, because His Holiness, I mean, his mind is just so, and he of course was thinking about the placement, the position of Tibetan refugees on the planet. And how are we going to get our, will we get our country back? If we get it back, do we want to just go back to the way it was before 1959, where we didn't even have wheels? His whole very broad thinking. And so he began to see, we need also Western education so that the Tibetan young people will fit in with what's going on in the world. And, we need to learn English. And, the women need an education. So a lot of that started to change slowly, but because of His Holiness. Yeah. And the whole Geshe-ma idea, that was from him. Yeah. That was his idea. I didn't hear the nuns saying, knock, 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 we want to become Geshe-mas. I think they just said, well, they told us we can't. And then His Holiness says, oh, yes, you can. Yeah. So then some of them went, oh, then I want to. Okay, and then the last question is, what do you see as obstacles to more nuns being fully ordained? The afflictions. Yeah, afflictions and karma. That's what stops it. Yeah. And of course, certain cultural ways of thinking, or family ways of thinking, or the degree of self-confidence you have. I found that when I lived by living in the Tibetan community for some time, I lost a lot of my self-confidence. And I didn't notice that until I came back to the West. And then I was like, oh, I'm not, something was not fitting in. So I had to start looking at that. But it's, it's not that people always going around saying you're inferior, blah, 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 blah. But it's just the way things are. And so you pick up on that. And so I can imagine being a Tibetan nun growing up in that environment, then some things you would never question. I mean, look at our country too. When they started way back in the 19th century for the Equal Rights Amendment, so that women would have equal rights, it still hasn't passed. There were women who were against it. And it's been brought before Congress several times in the last 200 years and hasn't happened. Yeah, so it's we can't just look and say, oh, it's their culture. This is, this is a karmic product, of the karma that the people created. Yeah, that everybody created. Because it's our minds that create a culture, isn't it? It's our minds. It's not a culture. It isn't like this, but we, human minds, are the ones who create it. Okay. Well, I did that. Are you proud of me finally? I finished. How long have you been telling me I need to do this? Any questions or comments?
So you said that when you took full ordination, suddenly you realized you had this responsibility to all other practitioners who would come after you, and your practice was no longer just about you.
Yeah.
But could you imagine that another bhikshuni wouldn't feel that way? They would still carry on as if this is my practice. I'm just wondering, is that your special quality? Or
I have no idea.
does it happen for everyone?
I have no idea. Maybe you can do a study on it.
Okay.
Yeah. Write it up, turn it in at some university, get a piece of paper. No, I have no idea. Yeah.
Because it sounds like it really brings to life the bodhicitta motivation, whereas the novice ordination doesn't so much.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting to me, how that would happen.
Yeah, but it's also the state of your mind at different times in your practice. When you're a novice, you're a baby beginner. You're just trying to learn what the words mean. When you've been around for a few decades, there's much more experience, much more understanding. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, when you're in kindergarten, you learn kindergarten things. You don't learn college things. Mm-hmm.
These are fascinating questions for someone who's a Jewish woman who wants to be a rabbi to ask.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like maybe you had a Zoom call with her, Venerable. Did you?
Yeah, we had some Zoom calls.
And do you think, now I'm not asking you to be a mind reader, but I'm just curious as to how your process is now affecting her. And I'm just wondering out loud, is she maybe considering not being an Orthodox practitioner?
No. What our discussions were two different people in different situations facing similar things and helping each other process, helping each other think ahead, comparing notes on what we had experienced from our own traditions. There was, when I was in Israel, I met another woman, Was she American or British? I don't know what she was. Maybe British, maybe Israeli. Anyway, she also was Orthodox. And of course, it was like banging her head against the brick wall, trying to become an Orthodox rabbi. It just doesn't happen. And so I said to her, why not become a conservative, join conservative Judaism, because you can become a rabbi in that tradition. Yeah. And she said, let's see if I can remember how she said it. She said, when you're a little kid, you always want your own family to accept you. You can go to the neighbor's house, but you want your own family. And so for her, Orthodox Judaism was her own family, and that was what she wanted to be ordained in. Yeah.
Just to make clear, from previous conversations to today, although you have invited anyone here to be Mula Sravastivada, the Abbey is going to be Dharmakuptaka.
Yeah, the Abbey will be Dharmakuptaka. Yeah. And then what's your question?
Just wanted to reemphasize that conversation that we made when we started many years ago, because we wanted to have a unity of
a Vinaya tradition.
Vinaya,
yeah.
And a few other things.
Right. What's funny is in my mind, if somebody came here, they had ordained in Mula Sravastivada, it doesn't matter to me, they're a monk, they're a nun, look at Geshe-la. Yeah. That doesn't matter to me. And for me, if we had people from different Vinaya traditions giving the ordination together, that wouldn't bother me at all, because the way I think is, Buddha taught Vinaya, and so all of the traditions are included in that. Because the Abbey is functioning in a society, and we're in contact with Tibetans, and we want to have a good relationship with them, as well as a good relationship with the Chinese, then things that, if I were just doing it my way, I wouldn't consider important, in order to have the acceptance of the Tibetans, I do it their way. So, for example, all of us go to, Vietnam or Taiwan or somewhere where we can have that ordination where all the people giving the ordination are Dharmakuptaka. And I do that so that the Tibetans who come here, don't say, oh, you had some people Dharmakuptaka, some people Mula Sravastivada. You can't mix traditions. Forget the fact that they did that before in Tibet, and that's how they got the bhikshu ordination back after it had been destroyed. We're not going to talk about that, but yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. So, sometimes what my attitude is, and because I want the Abbey, in the future to be accepted. We're never going to be part of the Tibetan institution, and I don't even want to be at this point, but to be accepted so that the Tibetan masters will come here and teach. That, I think, is very important. And the same thing. The Chinese are much more flexible about these Vinaya matters, because they have 5 different Vinayas translated into Chinese. But, so I want us to be acceptable to all of our seniors on both sides. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And why? Because we have a lot to learn from them.
related to that, besides the Abbey, thinking about Inji monastics in the Tibetan tradition, I know of, these amazing nuns who have taken bhikshuni ordination in Taiwan and who practice in the Tibetan tradition. And I know that there's lots of Inji monks who presumably get bhikshu ordination and are studying in the Tibetan institutions sometimes, whether it's Nalanda or Sarah or whatever. What do you think is going to happen, though, if as Tibetan Buddhism in the West evolves, the bhikshunis are all in one Vinaya and the bhikshus are in another? Do you think that that would be sustainable? What do you think might happen with that, again, outside of the Abbey?
I think everybody will do their own thing. That's the way Americans are. Yeah. So did you know that the Southern Baptist Convention, a few years ago, there was a big split, and then they just kicked out a few churches, big churches, because they have women pastors. And the Methodists, just last week, 20% of their congregations left the United Methodist thing because the United Methodists were more progressive, and this 20% wanted to keep things the way it was. And the issue was about LGBTQ ordination. Okay, so 20% of them left. Yeah. So, what do we do in America? You just, you don't agree with what the group does? Oh, go, okay, bye. I'll go set up my own thing. Yeah. So one thing that I do think is important, because what I've noticed, that the Western, the Western monks who have studied in the Tibetan tradition, I don't know of many. They don't go to Taiwan and take Dharmaguptaka ordination because they have it in the Tibetan tradition. So that isn't an issue for them. And none of them have seen, you would think that since we're all from the same culture, that there would be more mutual support for women's ordination, but I haven't sensed that at all. So, we're going to have our own homegrown bhikshus here. Yeah, so we have a few sprouts sitting in the front row. Yeah, are you going to be homegrown bhikshus? Yeah. Yeah. And then what other people do, I have no idea. Yeah. Venerable Hengqing. Yeah. I should also mention this, that, Venerable Hengqing and Venerable Wuyan have gone to some of the Tibetan conferences talking about bhikshuni ordination. And both of them are just so frustrated. So incredibly frustrated that, I don't know, do you want to add anything to that? Yeah, they really want the ordination to be available for the Tibetan nuns. They're happy to help us, but they really want the Tibetan nuns to have that opportunity, and they will do anything they can to make it happen.
I think because they come from a world where the bhikshunis are so well established, it's very mystifying to them that women don't want the full ordination. Venerable Wuyin will often talk about how, the whole society, you need women to be educated and have a certain position in society for bhikshuni ordination to take root. Right? Yeah. But what's interesting is Venerable Hengqing's always hard selling us on the idea that we will be outliers, right? If we're a Dharmaguptaka and, everyone's going to move forward. Someday there will be this huge Mula Sravastivada Bhikshuni Sangha. And we're going to be outliers. What are we going to do? And Venerable's always like, I'm fine the way we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely fine. So, Uh-huh.
Venerable Kunga's question reminded me of the story that we heard when Venerable Jinde and I think Venerable Jin Kerr were here a few years ago, and said very clearly that Buddhism was not always so popular in Taiwan, and that it was a result, starting in the 1980s, that it was a result of the bhikshunis really going virtually door to door and sharing the Dharma with the lay people in really specific ways to build those temples. So would, I know it's totally speculative, but would those nuns have had that wish to go forward and spread it in the same way if they were not bhikshunis, if they were only novice nuns? I would rather doubt that.
Yeah, I would say they may not have to. You have to take into account that in 1949 there was a mass exodus of Buddhists from mainland China, and they went to Taiwan, and so the nuns were very instrumental in setting up Buddhist institutes, and then the monks came and joined them.
And it seems to me that the Taiwanese monks know that and acknowledge that. So there's
Yes.
a whole different climate there. But,
Yes.
but one other point about that is that because of what you have gone through, and perhaps because what they have gone through, you had the drive, the wish, the conditions to go forward to change that for other people. Whereas I don't know so many monks this day and age, who have that same wish or that same motivation, or this, the drive behind it is not there.
Yeah, because they didn't go through the same experience.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the Taiwanese monks, by and large, except for there's one we know, they're very supportive. Very supportive.